Hello, and welcome to the Race, Wealth, and Health Podcast, a podcast that serves to educate and empower while we explore the intersections of social justice, economic empowerment, and holistic well-being within communities of color. I am your host, Dr. Joycelyn Morris, and I invite you to join me as we dive deep into the crucial topics that shape our lives, challenge the status quo, and strive for a more equitable future for all. This week, we're back to continue the conversation with Dr. Grant around the freedom to choose. Let's tune in.
Yeah. Wow. A lot of information I just want to share because you mentioned the fibroids, which is definitely prevalent in Black women, especially. Like a couple of stats I saw is like Black women are typically 3 times more likely to be diagnosed with fibroids. And, more than 80% of African American women will have fibroids by the time they're 50. The thing about them, though, is quite a few of us will have them and not even know it because they're not always symptomatic. But for those people who do have symptomatic fibroids, and maybe you can share some things, I'll just share what I know and understand, significantly heavier cycles in terms of a lot of blood flow when you're on your cycle, heavier periods, more painful periods. I'm not sure if there are any particular symptoms that you had to even kind of notify you that, because a lot of times people don't know until they try to get pregnant that they even have fibroids.
Interestingly, the first one, that cantaloupe-sized fibroid I told you about, I had no idea, which is crazy because in this part of the story, I was extremely skinny. I had no idea. The way I found out was that I went for my regular well woman exam, and the nurse was like, you don't feel it? You don't feel this massive thing in your body? And I was like, but upon reflection, there were a couple things that should have let me know. First, my digestion changed. My bladder changed such that I was not as regular. And you don't know this until after you have the fibroid outside your body. I just wasn't as regular, and I needed to use the restroom like a lot. But it had happened so gradually that I forgot what it was like to be normal.
Right.
So that happens. You, as you mentioned, might have some extremely heavy periods or painful periods. But again, it happens so gradually that you might not even remember what a normal period is. Mm-hmm. You might not even remember what it's like to live without this pain or to have a full appetite or whatever the thing is that you are being affected by until after the surgery.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not to mention a bulge sometimes in your lower abdomen.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be the case that, like in my case, the thing was poking backwards. So I still had a very flat stomach, but I have had versions of it in which some of the fibroids were poking out. And so I don't look pregnant necessarily, as some women do, but it's like I cannot achieve a flat stomach. And it's not because I'm not eating right. It's because it's a tumor in there.
Right. Yeah. And as you mentioned, non-cancerous, but still a tumor nonetheless. And I think one of the things that, as you mentioned, you went through multiple fibroid surgeries. And that's something that women need to know as well, is that, because we don't really know what causes them, you can do the surgery, but they can also come back.
They are likely to return until you reach menopause, because the same things that make the reproductive system work are the things that grow the fibroids. Mm-hmm. And so it's one to hear right now, actually. Like, I care less about it because I don't need my uterus in the same way, but they will return until I am menopausal. I will continue to do things that make it less likely that they grow back. So I'm not likely to have a crazy diet or to be drinking a whole ton. But there's not much that you can do other than wait for menopause, which is its own set of things that I'm not rushing toward either.
Listen, neither am I. But we're going to claim it for both of us. We're both far away from that. But one of the things you shared in your journey was preparing, physically, or as you were just mentioning, right, preparing physically for this process. What was the mental health preparation, right? Because I heard you specifically mention having grown up without your father and sort of thinking about embracing a process that could mean possibly that your child may grow up without a present father. How did you reconcile that?
The short answer is that I reconcile everything through writing. Writing is my first cut of, I don't know how I feel until I write it down. The journals of the time live right here. These are the journals of that time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so the first cut of it is just how do I feel?
Mm-hmm.
And me and the journal can be honest in ways that me and nobody else can necessarily be honest because it's just me, right? I went to therapy and tried out multiple therapists to kind of figure out like, who can I have this conversation with?
Yeah.
And just ask straight up, first session, like, hey, I'm trying to do this thing. Is it selfish? And so I had to work through what this means. I'm a researcher, so I did research. What are the outcomes for children who grow up in single parent homes? Do the outcomes for children who grow up in single parent homes look different for people whose mothers actively and affirmatively chose single parenthood than they look for people whose mothers did not choose that? What does it look like based on socioeconomic status? What does it look like in my region? So I, after having done all the soul searching, all the being honest with myself, all the being honest kind of with people in my family about what my motivations were and hearing what they were thinking about it. And they were all very much like, please get pregnant immediately. Like, why is this a question? Which was heartening. I kind of landed on that it was going to be okay.
Yeah.
I would have never guessed. And a part of the reason I want to talk about this publicly is that I think we could be so much more happy if we got creative about how we organize our lives. But as long as we are stuck in the I gotta do it this way kind of thing, then we close off some things. If it had occurred to me that I could do this myself from scratch, I probably would have never got, I definitely wouldn't have got married, to be totally honest, right? It was a means to an end and I shouldn't have done it, but I didn't have the freedom to move around that I felt like after the divorce. I didn't have a notion of like, let me call my homeboy's homeboy who want a baby and see if we can do it together. I just think that we could be so much more free if we were able to separate ourselves a little bit from our socialization.
Yeah. And because I was going to say, what do you think caused it for you? I mean, especially since you did grow up in a single parent home.
That's the
So,
problem. That's
okay.
exactly the problem. My whole life is organized around not getting pregnant when I was 14. My mama had her first baby when she was 14. So that was the one ask she had of me. Don't get a baby when you're 14. And then the next ask was go to school. Okay. Don't get a baby when I'm 14. Check. I'm 15. So even if I get a baby today, I've beat the norm in the family. And you want me to go to school? I'm going to go to the most school possible, right? Like I have all the schooling.
Right.
She never said it, but it was very clear in the 90s, at least, that growing up in a single parent family was bad and that fatherlessness was wrong. And all of these messages were coming not from my mama, but from the broader society and church about the virtues of virginity and all of that kind of stuff that was present. And whether one recognizes it or not, whether I recognize it or not, it was there. And it was driving the way that I was organizing and building my life.
Mm-hmm.
But there are moments in your life where you get a chance to look up and decide who you want to be. A divorce for many people is one of those moments where it's like, all right, boom, I'm about to reorganize my life. I was fortunate in that this happened after I had tenure. And so it was really like, you could really be anybody you want to be. You could live anywhere you want to live, what you want to do.
Do you think this was your first time in your life sort of having that experience of that level of freedom?
100% yes. Of knowing that I had that freedom.
Exercising that freedom.
No, of even knowledge, right? So I show up at FAM, the world is my oyster because it's college. I'm young, I'm free. I could do anything, but I don't know that. And so I don't choose to do anything. I choose to do the right thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just on the path doing the right thing until I have this moment where it's like, hey, you could literally do anything. What do you want? Now, it turns out that many of the things that I want are the things that I was already doing. If I had all the money in the world, I would still be a professor at Howard. I probably wouldn't take money from them. I would probably pay them to work there, but I would still work there.
Right.
If I had all the money in the world, I would still live in the same neighborhood where I live today. It turns out that my life is what I wanted it to be, even if I had the chance to redo the whole thing, which I did toy with, like leaving DC, leaving the academy, all those things were on the table. But I'm fortunate that the life I built, it is the life that I want.
Yeah. And so when it came to having the family and having a child, that was the one thing that you felt was the outlier once you kind of took that time to reassess your time. Okay.
Yeah. Like I reassessing everything, deciding what I want to do or what I want to be. And I want to be a mom, like, period. And have probably wanted to be somebody's mama since I was like 10. But how do you, what do you do with that? In my socialization, this means that I have to get married because I'm going to do it better than all the people who have done it in my family, who did it when they were kids or, whatever situations they went through. I was just going to do it better, which means I had to wait to do it until I was married and yada, yada, some more stuff. None of them put that on me. I want to be super clear about that.
Yeah.
So, hey, cousins, auntie, mama, if y'all watching, this did not come from them. They never said you gotta be this kind of person. They were always like, whatever you want to do, we hyping you up, go, go, go. But my own approach to life is like, whatever I do, I'm going to do it with excellence. And this includes my personal life, which I'm going to do with excellence, which was, again, not great decision making because it was not connected to happiness or freedom.
There was something that you said, and I wanted to double click on it in terms of creating this life for yourself. I think as we talk about fertility, and especially as we talk about societal norms and socialization around women in general, how did you know that you wanted to be a mother and it wasn't just your socialization or as it relates to society? Because I think that's a very unique juxtaposition I think that a lot of women are in these days of really questioning, is that something that they truly want or something that they feel that they should be aspiring to, much like marriage?
So the day it becomes clear to me that I'm about to get a divorce is the day after Christmas in Fort Lauderdale. One of the first people I call is my friend Amber. And Amber said something that changed everything in that moment, which was, it felt profound to me. It might not feel profound to you, but it was like, hey, you have this thing coupled and it's not coupled. Marriage is not a baby. These are two separate things. Like whatever your relationship is with this man is not the relationship with these kids, not the same thing. And so this was like an aha moment because, again, in the socialization, they are the same thing. In the socialization, you don't have a baby without a husband. And so what you talking about in this story where I can I don't be married without a husband, without a baby, or have a baby without a husband, like what are you talking about? This doesn't make any sense to me. And so I think once I got it in my head that these were two separate things, then I thought about them as two separate things. And there are journal entries about like, okay, well, what do you actually care about? Do you care about this career? Because you could put marriage and baby aside or partnership and baby aside and just like put your whole life in your career and be like the premier political scientist. Do you want to do that? No. I mean, politics is fine, but I don't care that much about it, right? You could, because you are getting divorced and you know your window of having a baby is small, be like, I'm just not going to have one. I'm about to belong to the streets, or I'm about to go find my next husband, or some other version of like life that's organized around partnership. Didn't feel right. Or you could have this life in which you focus on having a baby. Are you willing to trade the other two for the baby? Because also at this time, I think I'm coming to the realization that like this thing about having it all is probably not a real thing.
Michelle Obama said it's not all at the same time. Like,
right.
Yeah.
And so if you have to choose, I'm making the trade-off between the career, the man, and the baby. The career is secure. I have tenure. I can come and go from that as I please. But in this story, I felt like I was choosing between the man and the baby. And if I never get married again, I'm okay. But if I never had a baby, I didn't think I was okay. Like, what would 50-year-old Keneshia feel? And is 50-year-old Keneshia gonna be okay with a husband who loves her dearly and y'all all over the world and being snowbirds and all of this stuff? no, I wouldn't have been okay. I would have always had that longing. But is 50-year-old Keneshia with 10-year-old baby girl gonna be okay without a dude? Probably.
Obviously.
I'm gonna be all right.
I think it's just cool and really amazing. Not only did you go from like, it's unique that you not only just went from sort of traditional way of approaching family to one of the most modern approaches, right, to creating family for yourself. But I think that's really cool. And maybe listeners don't know, the cool thing is that your kids get to grow up together. They very much so get to have like a mother figure. They get to have father figures. And so they don't have to miss out on that experience of having multiple parents who love them.
Yeah.
Deeply. Yeah.
We got really lucky. It is my fantasy come to life every day, and we don't know what we doing, so we are making it up as we go. But the dads are both trained psychologists, which I think it adds another layer of like our ability to talk about things and think about things. And like I said, we're making it up as we go, and it is going well. And in the moments where it seemed like maybe it's about to be challenging, it don't get challenging because they don't let it get challenging because they going to talk about feelings because they are trained psychologists, right? We are all coming from a place of love and wanting the best and a place of acceptance of everybody for whoever they are. And it just works.
Yeah. It sounds amazing. One of the things I was just going to ask is, how do you see the intersection of your journey, specifically talking about your fertility reproductive journey? How do you see that intersecting with race, wealth, and health as we make the connection to the podcast?
I think they are all tied up. And so my socialization is probably an American woman's socialization, but particularly a Black woman's socialization, a Black woman raised in the South by Southern people's socialization. And so that's all race there. The health stuff is also tied to race, right? Like if I was a white woman or an Asian woman, I don't know that I would have a story about having massive fibroids when I'm 25 years old. Mm. And so some of how I have to deal with my health is connected to my race, is connected to the genes that I got and how they produce things that are specific to Black women. So there we have our health and our race. I think fertility stuff is inherently health. And in a way that I was able to deal with my fertility stuff had a lot to do with my socioeconomic status. Having money and access to money and investments and other kinds of things that I could draw on to say, listen, I want this baby. Here's how I'm going to be able to invest the money that I need for IVF. Here's how I'm going to be able to buy this baby a house. Because again, in this story, I'm coming out of a divorce. And so I got to buy a car. Where are we going to live? I had a house where I lived with my ex, but I didn't want that to be my baby's house. Right. And so I was fortunate that I had been setting up a financial life that made it the case that when I needed to pivot, I could do so seamlessly.
Yeah. That's awesome. I think I just generally know that IVF is expensive, but a lot of people don't really talk about what that process is. And some insurances cover portions of it, some insurances don't. So there's just a lot of things to consider. But one of the things you also mentioned was it seemed like you had priced out the possibility of going through the process at more than just one facility. How did you learn about that as an option?
Well, I had decided that I wanted to do CNY for all the reasons about the past and stuff, but the dads were further at the beginning of their journey. And so we visited places that they wanted to visit. And it turned out that they were all expensive. Let me also just say for the record that I have described CNY's fertility as like $5,000, which maybe it is, the actual IVF on the day you go get IVF. But you got to buy drugs. They going to be $5,000 or $6,000 or $7,000. You got to get an ultrasound every other day that I told you about, $5,000 or $6,000 or $7,000. If you traveling to Syracuse, $1,000 or $2,000. And so we talking about like, do you have $10,000 or $15,000 on hand? And if you don't, where are you about to get that from? If you need a gestational carrier, do you have $100,000 on hand to put on top of the $10,000 or $15,000 or $25,000 you spent to create your embryos? And so
Do people take out loans for this?
Some people take out loans. Some people refinance homes. Some people sell homes, as was the case in my situation. I had an extra random house in Tallahassee that I sold. And so you get to it how you want to get to it for your dreams.
Yeah. I thought it was really cool when you mentioned that with the dads, once you decided that y'all want to move forward, that you got some lawyers, et cetera, and very high level, like what was that? So we don't talk about arrangements and preparing for your arrangement would be and making sure that you had it documented in a way that you felt comfortable.
There's a whole industry for this.
Mm.
And people who are doing known sperm donation, which means that you know the person who is donating the sperm to you, like have lawyers who help them with this stuff. And so we went to a lawyer who knew how to do this. Also, like, just in general, shout out to the LGBTQ community because they are light years ahead of the straights in terms of how you build family.
Mm-hmm.
And so the dads knew about how to go find a lawyer because they had attended a conference about men having babies that told them, like, this is exactly what you do.
Mm.
So we knew how to find a lawyer because they knew how to find a lawyer. And once we get to the lawyer, we say, hey, this is how our thing is a little bit different from the norm. Can you write that up? And then the lawyer does.
Got it. Okay, cool. What you wanted to talk about is this journey. Your journey happened to be around fertility, having a family, but the real message seems like the process of freedom and determining how you want to live your life and finding your own version of happiness. And so how are you currently making sense of that? And what should we as individuals be thinking about when it comes to understanding your journey and how we could apply the framework to our own lives?
I feel kind of bad. I feel like, you know, when you go to the concert and you want your artist to sing the song on the album and sing it the way it's on the album and they show up talking about, let me tell you about my new. It's like, yes, there is a world in which I should be sitting here talking about politics and the Great Migration and PBS. Like, yeah, let's do that. But I don't, that's not what it's like. That's not where the fire comes from in my belly at the moment. Mm-hmm. And so, sorry. Not sorry, actually.
No, there's nothing for the we talked.
Okay. So there's that. But setting that aside, I think that the way I'm working through it is to write, which is, as I mentioned, my jam. Hopefully one day this will be a book where I tell people about, you know, this seems like it's a story about alternative families, but to the point that you just made, it's a story about building the life that you want and about figuring out how you lay down all the programming that you have gotten over the past 30, 40 years about who you're supposed to be and how you're supposed to be and be who you want to be. Mm-hmm. In terms of advice about how to do that, I hesitate to give advice because I speak from a position of great privilege. Like I happen to have a job where I'm super flexible. I have a job that pays me enough money that I can kind of build things out as I want them. And so I don't know how to tell individuals how to organize their life because I don't know how much flexibility they have.
Right.
But I think that it is free to dream. Like my process is paper to pen, turn on some music, sip some tea and figure it out. But your process might be go to the gym and figure it out, or go to church and figure it out, or go to therapy and figure it out, or whatever your thing is. But I think at minimum, just create the space to ask yourself, what do I actually want? Is the thing that I actually want attainable? If it feels like it's not attainable, am I sure that is not attainable? Or is it just going to look different than I thought it might look to get there? And then for me, it's make a list, right? And just eat the elephant bite by bite. But I think by this time, most people know what their process is. Right. And so if it's list for you, do your list. If it's something else, do whatever the thing is. But I think you got to dare to dream about what you actually want for yourself.
Yeah. I love that. I do want to ask, as you mentioned, first of all, I want to know for our listeners, like this was not a hoping your artist will come and sing your favorite song and they didn't sing your favorite song. We knew what we were talking about when we got here. But I think the one thing I do want to just kind of close us out with, as you said, we could be talking about politics, which is blowing up right now. And you're not, but this is the thing that you're passionate about. This is the thing that you're fired up about. Why is this the thing that you're fired up about? Why is this the thing that you want to share with people?
I think I feel like I wish somebody would have told me And there are many ways in which, even if you had told me when I was 25 that my current life would be my life, I would not have been ready to receive it. And so
Right.
I wish somebody would have told me, but it's not clear that it matters or that my life would be different. Feel like, especially in this like post 35 to, I don't know, 45 space,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I encounter a lot of people, women in particular, who are like scrambling to try to get at a thing. And I resonate with that. Like, I was you, girl. Like, and if you love him deeply and you like him a lot, marry that man, do it. But if you are marrying him to get to another thing that's not actually about him, don't do it, girl. You don't have to do it like that. You can do it this way. Or if you don't want a baby at all, cool. Like, whatever your thing is, do actual you.
Yeah.
Don't do what you think you're supposed to do actual you. And I just want to tell everybody, because I feel like these are not conversations that we have. We are not as much talking about like, hey, do freedom, as we are talking about, hey, did you find your husband? Are you pregnant? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, with freedom, it comes with an ability. It does come with some luxuries and privileges that you have to even think about freedom, whether that's pivoting from a career or just all the things. I don't want to negate that it definitely comes from a certain amount of privilege when you choose to live life on your own terms, which means pivoting in any way, shape, or form, whether it's personally, professionally, etc. But that aside, it also comes with just being willing to think outside the box, right? And it sounds like you had a very, which was helpful, supportive village, right? And family that was supportive of this, but everybody doesn't always have that either. So like really having to think outside the box and say, I want to live my life differently, whatever different looks like, but this is what's important to me, can be harder for some versus others. Like society
100%.
aside, just even not necessarily having the right support systems.
Yeah. Yes. I am very clear that I am lucky. 99 out of 100 people were like, yes, do it. Now, what some of these people said when they got home, I don't know, right? Like, was it some shit talking? Probably. Did they talk shit to me? No. And so that makes a big difference for sure. But even with potential pushback that you might get from people who you care deeply about, a part of what I'm trying to do here and a part of what I would like to do in any writing about this is to be one of the bits of information you get. Like, we get all these bits of information that help shape what we end up doing. And I feel like there are few bits of information that are like, do something else. And I just want to be one little bit of information. Maybe you don't have the freedom and luxury to do the things, but while I do, I just want to put a little something on your radar. Maybe it matters, maybe it doesn't.
No, I love that. And then what would you encourage women, although we're talking freedom in general, so whether that's you want to have a kid, whether you don't, but for those who actually do know that they do want to have a kid, what's your message to them as they think about that process?
If you know that you want to have a kid, I think that you should first try to find inner calm and peace and resolve for what could potentially be a difficult road, and try to make some peace with like, this thing could go either way before you do anything else. I'm going to give the advice that I use for myself, which is to get your body together as you also get your mind together. I am like a little, would have been athlete, but wasn't an athlete. And so I believe in training for stuff. Like, I train to get pregnant. And so I think to the extent that you can or have time, ready your body after you ready your mind, then do that. And then go use the science if you have access to it, for sure. Don't say, oh, I'll go next year, or oh, I'll go next time. If you are 35 years old, start at the doctor. The blood test about how many eggs you have is easy. It's just a regular blood test that you could do when you go to your well woman exam. You don't have to make it a big thing. And so don't assume that engaging your fertility has to start with something as big as IVF. It can just start with a conversation at your GYN, but it should be a thing that you are intentional about, because it might not come easily.
Yeah. But even that is helpful because I think a lot of times, depending on your GYN and that whole situation, you may not get that conversation. It's as simple as a blood test. Like, I'm sure it probably costs extra, but even just the idea that, oh, you don't have to do a whole lot of poking and prodding to at least start to understand how many eggs do I have left? And is that normal? What does that mean for me and where I am? And what could that mean for the future? So that's good to know. It's just a simple blood test because I feel like my GYN hasn't told me that.
Yeah, girl. Get your AMH levels.
Listen,
Tell her next time, run it. Let me see what's popping in there.
I'm definitely going to tell her to run it. As we wrap up, what's next for you, personally or professionally? What does Dr. Grant have?
What is next for me professionally is to write. I am halfway between trying to write about the modern family and figure out whether that it's definitely a story I want to tell, but figure out what it looks like to produce that for the public, and writing about migration still. I am interested / curious to write about migration of Black people from Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina to Florida, which is where I'm from, and my own family's migration story. Professionally, continuing to do the things. Personally, mommy stuff is first. And so, I'm happy to do that. I'm about to, I got my little postpartum weight off. So you might catch me if you see me in the streets in a little outfit. You just wave, keep going.
And how long did it get you to get back to postpartum? Because that's another thing that people love to do, that whole snapback mentality. Like
2 years.
Okay.
Yeah. Like I just got back last week. So
I feel like we want a good realistic, like what's really going on. So that's helpful because people definitely have these unrealistic expectations. And lastly, like quote or book, if anything, recommend. Favorite book or a book that comes to mind. It's sort of
favorite book,
or like a book that you've read recently that you found particularly meaningful.
I can't choose a book. Asking me to choose a book is like asking me to choose a favorite song. I can't. Books do different things. Okay. And then you got my fiction life versus my nonfiction life. Like I can't choose a book.
Last couple of books.
But I'm currently reading a book called Harlem Rhapsody, which is fantastic. In part because it's like, it basically is a story of this woman who was the literary editor of the NAACP's Crisis magazine in 1919. And she is a barrier breaker in that she has this job and it's really important. But she also, low-key, is the mistress of W.E.B. Du Bois, which is like, ooh, scandalous. And so I think this book is cute, in part because we get to see this woman who is kind of like bossing up, but also because this affair that they are having just reminds me of so much of history and how we sometimes put historical figures on a pedestal when they are like regular people and they do regular people stuff. And we see that across history. In this particular story, we hearing about Du Bois's many mistresses. We could be telling the same story about MLK. We could be telling the same story about some people and some institutions today. Low-key. Right. So that's what I'm reading. And it's cute because it's messy.
So it's kind of like good historical, but then also a little interesting, like old school Real Housewives level. Love it. Well, Dr. Grant, thank you so much for this conversation. I have thoroughly enjoyed it, learned something new, learned a lot of new things, actually. But definitely want to congratulate you on all the things that you have going on. We'll definitely be sure to check out the book and tell our listeners the name of the documentary that they can also check out.
My part in the documentary is this big, just for the to note. But the documentary is called Great Migrations, A People on the Move on PBS.
Awesome. Oh, and how can people follow you?
You can follow, my socials are my name, Keneshia Grant, at wherever, Instagram, Twitter. And then you could go to my website if you want to email.
And what's your website?
KeneshiaGrant.com or Kenesha.com.
Love it. Thank you again, Dr. Grant. I appreciate it. And thank you so much for being willing to share your story as always.
Thank you for the invitation.
Well, that's all for today, folks. Enjoyed the show? Be sure to like and rate the podcast. You can find the Race, Wealth, and Health podcast on multiple platforms, including Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe and turn on your notifications so you never miss an episode. I also want to hear from you, so don't forget to connect with me on social media. You can follow the podcast on Instagram and Facebook at Race Wealth Health. By joining the online community, you'll stay updated on the latest episodes, behind the scenes insights, and engaging discussions. Share your thoughts, comments, and questions there. I appreciate your support in sharing the podcast with your friends, family, and colleagues who may also find value in these conversations. Thank you again for joining me on this journey. Until next time, take care, stay informed, and keep up the good fight for equality.